Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabi'a sunnatahu ila yawmiddin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome again to another episode of your weekly Islamic chat show, Guest of the Week, coming to you from Sharjah TV. I'm your host, Ismail Bullock, and today we want to talk about, or just touch upon 4 pillars that in relation to bad character. We had a previous episode where we focused on 4 pillars that can help you define or refine your character in a good way. And now I want to talk about 4 that has the opposite and negative effect and impact on your character. And of course, to do that with me is again Ustad Muhammed. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for coming on again.
Wa iyaakum, it's always a pleasure. Barakallah fikum.
So, last episode we'd spoken about those 4 pillars that refine your character. So now it's on the flip side. You know, the 4. Of course, there's more than 4, but 4 very pertinent ones, as you mentioned in the previous episode, Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned, that really are, you could say, destroyers of a good character.
Absolutely. So Ibn al-Qayyim, he describes that good manners are built upon 4 pillars, and we said that is patience, sabr, and al-iffah, that is sufficing yourself with what is halal, shaja'ah, bravery, and al-adl, justice. And he says that bad character is built upon 4 pillars, and that all bad character comes from these 4 things. If we can get rid of them and we can work on refining them and changing them, we can really cut off the root of all bad character. So he mentions 4. He says, al-jahlu, wal-dhulmu, wal-shahwatu, wal-ghadab. He says, ignorance, behaving in an ignorant way. So ignorance is actually a character trait. We'll come to that in a moment. But the idea of behaving ignorantly, al-jahl, wal-dhulm, oppression. And that can be oppression in its most sort of specific sense, like oppressing people, but even in its general sense of just putting something in the wrong place, just behaving in the wrong way at the wrong time. And he says, shahwa, desires, and al-ghadab, anger. If a person can get rid of these 4, and we can talk about how as well, because it's not just about talking about, okay, these are the 4 we need to get rid of, but also how does a person get rid of them? Then these 4 are the root, and they are the pillars that bad manners stand upon, these 4 things. We can actually support that to a certain extent with the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah says, Allah commands you with justice and ihsan, doing good to others, and ita'i dhil qurba, giving to your relatives. And Allah prohibits you from al-fahsha, immorality. And that comes under shahwa, desires, behaving in an immoral way. So al-fahsha wal-munkar, an evil doing, and al-baghi. And al-baghi is al-dhulm, transgression against other people, oppressing other people. يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah admonishes you so that you might remember and take a remembrance from what Allah admonishes you with. So if we look at these 4, we actually see that this is the root of all of the bad character that we have. We have to remove our bad character. We spoke in the previous episode that we did together about the dua that we make, Allahumma hdina li ahsani al-akhlaq, la yahdi li ahsaniha illa ant, wasrif anna sayyi'aha, la yasrifu anna sayyi'aha illa ant. O Allah, guide us to the best of manners, no one guides to the best of them except you, and keep us away from the worst of manners, no one keeps away from the worst of manners except you. So we are commanded to reform our character. Allah Azza wa Jal said, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by the soul and by the one who fashioned it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is the one who inspired us to know what is right and what is wrong, to know what is al-fujur and what is al-taqwa. And some of the scholars of tafsir, if you look at the tafsir of this ayah, some of them said, it's not that Allah inspired you through your fitrah, but it's that Allah Azza wa Jal taught you through al-wahi, through revelation. Allah taught you through revelation what is fujur and what is taqwa. And your fitrah, to a certain extent, your nature, is something which also supports you in knowing what is right and wrong, but ultimately your nature in itself isn't enough. And from the evidences that your nature isn't enough is the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَنْ يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانُ إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. We offered the responsibility of Sharia to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, and they declined to take it, and they were fearful of it, and mankind took it on. Indeed, he was extremely oppressive and extremely ignorant. This tells us that the nature of mankind, if we don't purify ourselves through Islam and through Islamic etiquettes and character, we will end up being from those people who are ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا, extremely, and the word used here is not just ظَالِمًا جَاهِلًا, ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا, extremely oppressive and extremely ignorant. That's our nature if we don't refine it. So Allah gave us a nature that calls towards good manners, inclines ourselves towards good manners with Allah and with other people. And then Allah Azza wa Jal gave us revelation. And that revelation, what it does is it makes firm what our nature was kind of calling us to and what we wanted to be. You know, oh, this person's got such lovely manners. It's like an instinctive thing. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us exactly what is good manners and what isn't. And this is something which some of the scholars mentioned it, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, others mentioned it, that you can't know the tafasil, the details of what is right and wrong except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your nature can give you some of that ijmalan, a generic idea that, oh, it's good to be knowledgeable and it's good to be kind and it's good to be generous, but it can't give you all of the details of what's right and wrong. That can only come from al-wahi, from revelation. You get a general picture through logic, through your nature, through your heart and what feels right to you. You might get a general idea of certain things that are right and wrong, but the details of it, that's going to come from revelation. So Allah Azza wa Jalla is the one who taught us at-taqwa, what is righteous, and He taught us what is al-fujur, what is wicked. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Successful is the one who purifies their soul. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And the one who makes their soul filthy or dirties their soul, that person, they are going to lose. They're going to lose and they're going to be humiliated because they dirtied their soul. And one of the ways that you can taint your soul, you can cause your soul to become tainted and to become dirty is through bad manners, bad character. And these points of bad character, it comes back to that. They are the things which taint your heart, which cause a person's heart to be sealed, which cause a person to have a bad relationship with Allah and a bad relationship with people. And while you're thinking about that idea of relationship with Allah and relationship with people, perhaps it might be worthwhile to mention the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَيَجْعَلُ لَهُمُ الرَّحْمَنُ وُدًّا. Those who believe and do righteous deeds, Allah will make for them love. This wood that Allah makes for them, it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts love on the earth for those people because of their relationship with Allah. So when they have belief in Allah and they follow up that belief in Allah and cement it through increasing in righteous deeds, Allah Azza wa Jal calls upon Jibreel. And He says to Jibreel, "Oh Jibreel, I love this person, so you must love them." And so Jibreel loves them. And then Jibreel calls to the angels in the heavens that Allah loves this person, so you must love them. ثُمَّ يُوضَعُ لَهُ الْقَبُولُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Then acceptance is placed for that person on the earth. That Allah places love. So what I wanted from that is look at how your relationship with Allah leads to good character and good manners with the people. If you ask that person, why do you like this person? They say, oh, it's really, really well-mannered, really kind, really good person. But ultimately, it's their relationship with Allah that makes them like that.
And that's interesting because that's a good benchmark for us, because we see sometimes people who are, apparently from the appearance practicing, but they may be very harsh and not having good manners. So you may see them going to the masjid, praying 5 times a day, maybe even giving sadaqah, maybe even seeking knowledge, but they're very harsh and very bad manners. And this is really, this is a complete contrast to what they should be. So there's definitely there an issue with their practice of Islam and even their understanding of Islam. And like you said, ultimately their relationship and understanding the relationship with Allah and what is the reality of ibadah and taqwa and Islam in total.
Absolutely, your relationship with Allah will be affected. If you don't have good character, it will affect your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as your relationship with the people. And that's, we mentioned it in the other episode that we did, but it's important for people to realize that manners, it's not something that you just work on with people. It's not like I'm going to be nice to people, they're going to be nice to me. It's about you building your relationship with Allah. And through that, Allah Azza wa Jal will place for you, will correct your good relationships with others. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, rahimahullah ta'ala, on that topic, he said, كان العلماء فيما مضى يكتبون بعضهم إلى بعض هؤلاء الكلمات. He said, the scholars of old used to write to each other with certain pieces of advice. And one of the things they used to say is, من أصلح ما بينه وبين الله أصلح الله ما بينه وبين الناس. If you correct what's between you and Allah, Allah will correct what's between you and the people. If you can have good manners with Allah, Allah will teach you how to have good manners with people. But if you can't have good manners with Allah, your good manners with people even feel hollow. And so, for example, if you look at, people who don't call to religion, people who, for example, whether it be atheism or anything else, that idea that, we just need to be kind, good human beings to other people, that doesn't really match with what Islam says, because Islam says that your good manners with people is a part of your worship and your relationship with Allah. And that if that relationship with Allah is zero or is deficient, then your relationship with people will also be like that. And whatever you do to be kind to people or to try to show these kind of human shared values, it will always feel hollow and insincere if your relationship with Allah is broken. And that's why we come back to the ayah, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. We only feed you for the sake of Allah. We don't want you to reward us. We don't even want you to thank us. We don't even want you to say shukran for what we did. We only want it from Allah. And if you want it from Allah, Allah will fix your relationship with other people. So when we look at these negative characteristics, we should also look at them in light of our relationship with Allah, not just in light of the way we treat other people. So the very first one Ibn al-Qayyim mentions is al-jahl, ignorance and ignorant behavior. This is something we seek refuge from, by the way, when we leave the house. When we say, Bismillah, tawakkalna ala Allah, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Bismillah, we've put our trust in Allah, our reliance in Allah. There is no ability to change anything or any power to do so except with Allah's help. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika an adilla aw udal, aw azilla aw uzal, aw adlim aw udlam, aw ajhala aw yujhala alayh. O Allah, I seek refuge with you from being misguided and misguiding other people. And I seek refuge with you from slipping up or causing others to slip. And I seek refuge, until the narration mentions, I seek refuge with you from behaving ignorantly and other people behaving ignorantly with me.
Just going to hold you on that point. It's time for our first break.
Inshallah.
Join us, inshallah, after this short break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Now, just before the break, you mentioned that hadith, the dua when we leave
the house.
And we got to the point where you mentioned that the person seeks being ignorant or someone being ignorant to them.
To them. So that shows you that ignorance is not just a measure of knowledge, in the sense of it's not just simply a lack of, like adamul ilm, just a lack of knowledge, but it's even a characteristic in somebody, that a person behaves in accordance with the knowledge or the ignorance that they have. And that also tells us a very important thing, which is that knowledge, that manners in Islam is built upon knowledge. It's not built upon necessarily, fitrah mahda, just pure, nature. It's built upon knowledge. You learn what is good. You learn what is bad. And Ibn al-Qayyim says something profound about ignorance. He said, it makes you see something beautiful to be ugly, and see something ugly to be beautiful. and you see something perfect and you believe it to be deficient, and you see something deficient and you believe it to be perfect. And ultimately, the world is enough of an evidence for the truth of that statement. If you just look around you and you look at the way people's opinions are tainted by ignorance and the way their behaviors are tainted by ignorance, that somebody might do the worst of things and they might actually believe that what they're doing is the greatest example of freedom and good behavior and so on. And it might be from among the most ignorant of things, because if a person doesn't cultivate their soul and develop their soul and purify it through Islam, then ultimately they're going to see every single thing that they're going to see is going to be, they're going to look at it the wrong way around. And they're going to see things that are so beautiful, but they're going to see them to be something horrible. And something which is so horrible, and they're going to see it to be beautiful, because they have no real measure of what's right and wrong. And that's where we came back to the idea that, yes, your soul and heart can give you a general feeling about something, or a general something which is mujmal, which is generic, but it can't give you the details. And that's why people, subhanAllah, you hear people talking about things in Islam, whether it be, for example, if we talk about the hijab, for example, and the honor that Allah gave to a Muslim woman through the hijab, and the way that Allah honored her and raised her status. How many women today, Muslim or otherwise, see the hijab as something which takes away from a woman's honor instead of something which actually gives her honor? So they see, like Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, يُرِيهِ الْقَبِيحُ بِصُورَةِ الْحَسَنِ. Something really horrible, they see it to be something amazing. And something really amazing, they see it to be something horrible.
I mean, if you think about it, I mean, that's why we need guidance, because, like you said, hopefully, and nowadays that really is a hopefully. Maybe before there used to be those general things that generally people all agree on is good or is bad. But I mean, nowadays, even if you just go in different countries, you may find a country that, a'udhu billah, legally allows a father and daughter to get married, because they've just been left to that supposed freedom to do whatever they want. You may find a country that allows small children to smoke marijuana. So if you leave it to human, we'd like to think that they will go by this fitrah, but even that, so many people, they don't go by that anymore, do they?
And that's the thing, fitrah can actually be damaged. Some people, you should never see that your inclination or your nature is guaranteed. Allah gives you it when you're born. مَا مِن مَوْلُودٍ إِلَّا يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. There is no baby except when he's born with a good nature. But what do your parents do? They corrupt that nature. If you're not brought up with Islam and Islamic knowledge, you're going to get, that nature is going to be so corrupt that they'll reach a point where even your nature can't be relied upon to tell you what's right and wrong. And that's why, particularly if you look at the non-Muslim world, there is a crisis in terms of character and manners right now. And that crisis comes about because not only have they lost the knowledge of revelation, but also even the fitrah. And so there are huge arguments over what's right and wrong in the most fundamental sort of human characteristics of what's right and wrong are all up for question. Because if you leave revelation, eventually you'll even lose the nature that is in your heart of what's right and wrong. And you'll end up with having no guidance whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons why we ask Allah to keep us away from غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِينَ. Al-Maghdubi alayhim we're going to come to in a moment, but al-Dallun are those people who don't know the difference between what's right and wrong. And they lost, and that's why even religiously you see religions that used to have a firm sense of what's right and wrong, right? And now today there is literally nothing left which is sacred.
No moral compass anymore.
No moral compass. Nothing is wrong anymore. Nothing is not allowed. And that's why if we take away from this Islamic guidance and Islamic character, ultimately your worship will suffer, your society will suffer, your community will suffer, and there will be just no sense of what's right and wrong anymore. So many bad manners and bad attributes come out of that, and they come out of it in a particular way. Because when you have ignorance, what comes out of that ignorance is a justification of bad manners and bad character, and actually believing that it's right. So someone says, well, I don't think it's wrong to be stingy, or I don't think it's wrong to be rough with people, or I don't think it's wrong to be whatever it might be. And I don't think it's wrong to be cowardly. They start to actually see it to be something good. So that's where ignorance comes from. The second one that he mentions is al-dhulm, oppression. And he says al-dhulm is وضع الشيء في غير موضعه, putting something in the wrong place. And so, for example, what Ibn al-Qayyim takes it very generally, and he says, for example, you see people laugh in a situation where they should be somber, and they should be behaving in a dignified manner. And you see somebody cry in a situation where people are happy. And you see somebody get angry when they should be patient. And you see somebody overlook something when they should be angry. And you see somebody, for example, in a situation where they're supposed to give, they hold back. But in a situation where they're supposed to hold back because it's not permissible, they spend. And so you see people doing everything in the wrong place. The thing with al-dhulm is that it doesn't necessitate ignorance. It's not always that it comes from just being ignorant. Sometimes somebody knows that what they're doing is wrong, but there's something which carries them into doing that thing which is wrong. So this idea that it comes from just doing things in the wrong place, having the wrong manners at the wrong time. And that's really interesting because there's certain manners we believe are praiseworthy, right? We spoke about them last time. But there are also situations where using that at the wrong place in the wrong time is actually in itself blameworthy. And we talked about, for example, a person is between two extremes. So if you look at generosity, we said generosity is between stinginess and wastefulness. And a person might believe that they're being generous and actually they're being wasteful. How many people who could be wealthy, people who have, Allah has given them a lot of goodness, but they waste what they've been given, believing that that wastefulness is generosity. And how many people are there who hold back and they believe that what they're doing is perhaps, for example, I'm being prudent, I'm being sensible, and yet they're holding back from what Allah commanded them to give. So here you see this issue of not putting things in the right place. If we talk about refining our character, everything has to be used at the right time. This is one of those things which the scholars sometimes define under hikmah, the idea of a person having wisdom. Allah Azza wa Jalla said, يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Allah gives wisdom to whoever He wants, and whoever has been given wisdom has been given a great deal of good. The wisdom that's a great deal of good is knowing when to do the right thing at the right time. That's why you see people not knowing, and you know when you see somebody who doesn't do the right thing at the right time, you attribute foolishness to them. This person is, safi, somebody who's just foolish. They don't know what to say the right words at the right time. So you see people in a somber gathering, in a very serious situation, joking, being silly, saying foolish things, regretting what they said, speaking out of turn. And then that person automatically, their character is degraded in your eyes. It's like this person, they don't have manners. They don't know what to say in what situation. So this is all a part of dhulm, not knowing what to say. And then dhulm as oppression to other people. So oppressing people, not giving people their rights. This leads to all the things, all the bad characters that are to do with oppression, whether it's stinginess, not giving when you're supposed to give, or whether it is, for example, harshness, not showing gentleness and kindness when you're supposed to show it, putting things in the wrong place. And then you see people, again, doing the wrong thing to the wrong person. So in situations where they're supposed to have izzatun nafs and show dignity and show a degree of kind of sternness, perhaps with their children, for example, when their children transgress certain limits or behave in a bad way, and they're supposed to be a little stern with them and teach them, some ta'deeb, a little bit of education, a little bit of giving them some discipline, and you see them do the opposite, right? We leave them to do whatever they want. I believe they should just find their own way and find their own path. And then later on they complain that my children are not righteous towards me. But you were soft with the people that you were not supposed to be soft with. And you were harsh with people that you were not supposed to be harsh with. So knowing to do the right thing at the right time is really important for developing good manners. And that's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Also, like you mentioned, then it may be that they discipline the children as well to the other extreme, where they beat them severely, and again they push them away from being practicing or from being good Muslims. And on the topic of oppression, obviously, just like when we spoke about manners, good manners, we mentioned ultimately the most important of having good manners is your manners and your relationship with Allah. And that reminded me, we're talking about oppression. The verse that says, "Inna shirka la dhulmun azim," you know, that indeed shirk, associating partners with Allah, is a great oppression. So this is kind of the worst oppression that we can do upon ourselves, is when we get involved in shirk and associating others with Allah in worship.
And that's exactly why we say that manners is a fundamental part of worship. And that actually in Islam, manners and worship and tawheed, the oneness of Allah, it all comes together in one package. It's not, you can't separate. And that's why if we said from the worst of character is dhulm, and the worst of dhulm is making a partner with Allah, so the greatest act of justice, which we spoke about in the previous episode about good manners, the greatest act of justice is to worship Allah alone and with no partner. So this is all a part of the same concept, and it all comes together. And that's why if you have dhulm with people and you oppress people, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-dhulmu dhulumati yawm al-qiyamah," that oppression is a darkness on the day of resurrection. And a person, like the scholars, they say there are three types of sins. There is a sin that will not be forgiven, and that is a person who dies making a partner with Allah before they repented. And there is a sin that will not be overlooked, and that is the oppression you do to other people. And there is a sin that will be forgiven and overlooked, and that is what you do between you and Allah, which is less than shirk and does not affect the rights of other people. And that doesn't mean it's something light, but it means that you are dependent upon the forgiveness of the most merciful, as opposed to the other two, one of which Allah promised He will not forgive, and the other one Allah promised He will not overlook it. And you are dependent upon forgiveness from the people that you have oppressed. And they just think about, if you came on the Day of Judgment and you had done something wrong, you hadn't made a partner with Allah, you'd done something wrong. You neglected something Allah commanded you to do. And you depend upon the forgiveness of the most merciful. This is something that you hope and believe, inshallah, Allah will forgive you for it. But now imagine that your forgiveness depends upon an individual, like somebody that you hurt them in the street, or your neighbor that you disturbed, and you now depend upon that person for Jannah.
I'm going to have to hold you because it's literally a time for a break.
No problem, inshallah.
We'll continue after the break. Join us after this short break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Now, just to continue, when you mentioned, given that scenario of Yawm al-Qiyamah and the person that's been oppressed,
and how you actually require their forgiveness. And if you were in the situation where you could not enter Jannah unless this person that you oppressed on the street forgives you. Now you don't feel so sure. Will they forgive you? Will they not forgive you? They're not the most merciful. They're not even maybe merciful, let alone the most merciful. And suddenly now you realize the severity of oppressing other people and how it can lead to destruction in this world and the next. So that is another fundamental cause of bad character. The third one we're going to talk about is shahwa, desires. Desires is the opposite of, really the opposite of al-afaf, right? Al-afaf, we spoke about sticking to what is halal and really saying, I'm going to live my life in a way that is within the limits of Allah as best I can, and I'm going to try never ever to seek to go beyond those limits. But actually, when you talk about shahwa, desires, it's the idea that you live in the other way. You know, I want to fulfill every one of my desires, whether it's my food, whether it's, you know, relationships or whatever it is. I'm just going to take whatever I want and continue to take it and take it and take it, regardless of whether it is halal or whether it's haram. And this is really the reason for the anger of Allah. This is the al-maghdubi alayhim. People who knew what they were doing was wrong, and they continued to do it because they wanted it. Their souls craved it. Inna an-nafsa la'ammaratun bis-su'. The soul is constantly commanding you and inclining you towards evil, if you don't purify it with the religion of Islam. So this issue of desires, it leads to all kinds of bad manners. If you look at, for example, anything to do with stinginess, cowardice, the way that you behave towards other people, a lot of the origin of those bad manners is shahawat. I desire money. I want to be wealthy and rich. So I don't give it when Allah commands me to give it because I want it. I crave it. And when you talk about relationships, how many people destroy themselves because of relationships? And in their mind, that relationship is the only thing that they could not imagine. Perhaps some of them would say, I couldn't live without it. Because of how far their desires have taken them to an extent where they believe that they couldn't survive without that shahwa being fulfilled all the time. And then that shahwa doesn't just limit itself to money and relationships, it goes into everything. A person, even in their food, they can't control anymore what they eat. They just, whether it's halal, haram, whether it's, they fill themselves until they can't stand up because they're just fueling their shahawat in every single thing. And that's when a person starts to cross many of the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then their behaviors and their character, the same thing happens. A person holds back from good character because of their desires. And a person falls into bad character because of their desires. It could be the desire for fame, the desire for influence in society, power, authority, that causes a person to fall into dhulm and to hurt other people and to oppress them because the person is full of desire for something that Allah Azza wa Jal made haram, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you not to crave it, like wealth and status. Wealth is absolutely fine if Allah Azza wa Jal gives it to you and you use it in the right way, you earn it the right way, use it in the right way, no problem. But when you crave it, it's the craving it that's the problem. Authority is not a problem if Allah gives you authority and you use it with justice. One of the seven who will be shaded on the day when there is no shade except Allah's shade is a just ruler. A just ruler. But now when somebody craves it, they want it. I want to be in power over people. I want to have authority. This is the problem. So sometimes the issue is that the actual thing itself may not be haram, but the fact that the person craves it is where the haram comes into it. So craving for things, not controlling yourself. There's no sabr. When a person has shahawat, there's no sabr. A person is not being patient upon what Allah commanded. It's not keeping away from the haram because they lost control of their nafs. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لَيْسَ الشَّدِيدُ بِالسُّرْعَةِ. He said, the strong person is not by wrestling. It doesn't happen by wrestling. But the shadid is مَنْ يَمْلِكُ نَفْسَهُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ. The person who controls themselves when they're angry. So the person who loses self-control, all kinds of evil come to it. And that leads us to the fourth one, which is al-ghadab, anger. And anger is a cause for a lot of bad manners and bad character. And it's also a cause for a lot of misery in a person's life. Generally, if you look at times when you behaved inappropriately or where you really regret something you did, a lot of the time, the origin of that is al-ghadab. It takes a person away from, for example, al-ana, which the Prophet ﷺ praised. Taking things at ta'anni, being just slow and taking your time to understand something. It causes a person to jump in. How many people we see dive into an issue with 2 feet, and then they come out and they're like, oh, I've made a big mistake. I've said something I shouldn't have. I've done something I shouldn't have. Because they didn't take it slowly. They jumped into it and then they made a mistake. So this issue of being angry, it leads to oppression. A person hurts other people, harms other people because they got angry, they saw red, and then they lose control. And anger is that thing that not only the Prophet ﷺ advised that companion when he said to him, La taghdab. He said, Ya Rasulullah, awsini, O Messenger of Allah, give me some advice. Qala la taghdab, don't get angry. He said, awsini, give me some more advice. He said, La taghdab, don't get angry. He said, Ya Rasulullah, awsini, give me some more advice. La taghdab, don't get angry. Because this anger, it brings about destruction in this world and the next. Is it the case that all anger is bad? It's not the case that all anger is bad, because there is al-ghadab lillahi azza wa jal. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would give a khutbah, ihmarrat aynah wa ala sawtuh, his eyes would become red and he would raise his voice and he would become angry, and they would say ka'annahu mundhiru jaysh, like he was the sergeant who is stirring up the army, like who is shouting at the soldiers in the army, like a drill sergeant. كأنه منذر جيش. saying صبحكم ومساكم, يعني your enemy is going to attack you in the morning and your enemy is going to attack you in the evening. So that is anger for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ never got angry for his own personal matters that were personal to him. He never got angry. Anas radiallahu anhu said something amazing. He said, I served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years. He never said to me, why did you do this and why didn't you do this? And in some of the narrations it mentions he never raised his hand to a servant or to a woman or to an animal. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He never raised his hand, never ever hit a woman, he never ever hit an animal, like he never beat his riding beast, and he never raised his hand to a servant. And when it was a matter of his personal honor, he would not get angry about it. But when it was a matter of Allah's religion, he would get angry for the sake of Allah. So that controlled anger. We spoke about the hadith, لَيْسَ الشَّدِيدُ بِالسُّرْعَةِ, that strength isn't about wrestling, but strength is about controlling yourself when you get angry. So someone might ask, how do I get away from these 4 bad characteristics? So in terms of al-jahl, a person gets away from them or gets away from it with knowledge. Seeking knowledge, not just in the belief, Islamic belief, but also in worship, how to worship Allah properly, also in manners, what's considered to be good manners and bad manners. Some of the early generations, they used to say that they used to learn manners before they learned knowledge. And they used to learn the knowledge relating to manners before they even learned the knowledge relating to the Quran or the Hadith. Knowledge. Dhulm, it comes from, some of the scholars, they say of dhulm, it comes from, the opposite of it is a tazkiyah, is purifying your soul, and or the opposite of shahwa you can say is a tazkiyah, is purifying your soul and prohibiting it from what is wrong. The opposite of dhulm is justice, right? So a person develops justice through their knowledge and through purifying their soul to be just. And the opposite of anger, this is where the key thing is, about how do you control your anger? The Sharia gives a number of options for controlling anger, some of which are kind of common things people think about, which might not necessarily be true. You commonly hear people say, Salli ala nabi, you know, give salah and salam upon the Prophet. This is not from the Sharia. There's no sunnah about sending salah and salam upon the Prophet to control your anger. But from the things that are mentioned in the sunnah is, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. The Prophet saw a man and his face was red, and his veins were throbbing. And he said, I know a word that if this man said it, everything that is with him would go away. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge with Allah from shaitan the outcast. So that is something that if a person gets a habit of seeking refuge with Allah and the dhikr of Allah, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا إِذَا مَسَّهُمْ طَائِفٌ مِّنَ الشَّيْطَانِ تَذَكَّرُوا فَإِذَا هُمْ مُبْصِرُونَ. Those people of taqwa, when shaitan gives them an impulse to do something, an anger, they remember Allah and then they can see clearly. Or they remember that this is from the shaitan and they control themselves and they can see clearly. From the things that Sharia gives us is that if you're standing, sit down. And if you're sitting, lie down. And if you're in an environment where the person making you angry is with you, don't be frightened to go out, like Ali radiallahu anhu did in the famous where he got his kunya Abu Turab, when the Prophet brushed the dust from his head and said, Qum ya Abu Turab, stand up, or dusty person. That if you sometimes get upset or angry with something, instead of venting your anger, take a break, take some fresh air, come back in when you've controlled yourself. Again, all of these things can be learnt. As for wudu is something the scholars mention, that it can calm down your anger. It's not necessarily, I didn't find a hadith for it, there may be, not to the best of my knowledge, I didn't find one, but it is something that some of the people of knowledge mentioned, that make wudu, remember Allah, recite the Quran, calm yourself down, and remembering Allah is so important in all of this. So again, these are all these negative characteristics, and all the solutions to them are things that somebody can do. A person can learn knowledge of Islam. A person can practice patience. A person can strive to be someone who goes for the halal and keeps away from what's haram. A person can try to control their desires, and every time you do a little bit for Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a lot. And that's why if you just do a tiny little bit of effort for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will give you a great amount in return. And Allah will purify those negative characteristics from you and bring you to a higher standard of character. Perhaps if we're sort of looking at some things to conclude with, we could look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You have the best standard of character. The fact that the Prophet ﷺ has the best standard of character means we can learn a lot from looking at his life. Aisha radiallahu anha, she said about the Prophet ﷺ, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ أو كما قالت. She said his manners were those of the Quran. So I think when we look at that, we see that by reading his seerah, by trying to copy how he behaved. For example, if somebody personally causes you a problem, how do you behave? And how do you behave when you see the rights of Allah being infringed upon? You can learn that from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, and learning his seerah can make a big difference to your character, your manners as well.
I mean, like I said, we've spoken about so much stuff, but I think what is important for everyone to realize is that, especially if they watch the last episode, if you watch the last episode and you watch this episode, you really have a really strong foundation and guideline. People are always looking now for searching online or attending courses of many times non-Muslims on how to live a good life and how to be successful in life and how to be successful with people and how to be a good person. And we have all these answers in Islam. So just from the last episode and this episode, these pillars that we've seen on the good character and the pillars that we've seen on the bad character, these are more than enough.
Absolutely. If you imagine a person works on their patience and they try to suffice themselves with what's allowed and they strive to do the right thing, to be brave enough to, even if it means a little difficulty for themselves or some difficulty or hardship for themselves, and they try to be just and balanced in their character, and then a person strives to learn Islamic knowledge and strives to keep away from all kinds of oppression and develop wisdom and balance in what they do. And a person is someone who controls themselves, keeps their nafs away from its desires and away from what Allah Azza wa Jal made haram, and tries to purify themselves and their soul. And then a person controls their anger. Allah, this person will be in a very, very good situation, inshallah ta'ala. And they can build upon that with the things which bring them completeness of manners and get them even closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Jazakallah for sharing that with us, and also for the video tuning. Inshallah, join me same time, same place. Inshallah, I leave you as always the greetings of Islam, the greetings of peace. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.